Hello guys, welcome to Rebuild Academy. My name is Adil Momi and I welcome you to the very first part of our series From Virus to Vaccine, Let's Fight Infodemic. I hope you all are doing well fighting pandemic as well as infodemic. But before we begin, let me tell you a very important thing. It is extremely important and highly recommended to watch this series in order. Only then you will get a complete idea and a clear picture of every concept involved. For this purpose, I would suggest you to use the playlist. The link is given in the description. Now, let's begin. Today we will start with our first topic, organism, in which we are going to discuss what an organism is, what are its basic characteristics, and then what are different types of organisms. Then, in the second topic, we are going to discuss cell and its structure, what are its different parts and its functions. Okay, then let's do it. So, what is an organism? An organism is anything with the ability to live. They are also called living things. It can be an insect, a shark, a tree, or it can be humans. Also, flowers and fishes are organisms. Now, what do you mean by living? There are certain characteristics which an organism possesses, through which we can identify them. Let's try to understand some of these characteristics one by one. The first one is growth and development. In day-to-day life, we use these terms interchangeably, but they are different. The growth represents the structural change, whereas the development represents the functional change. Let me explain this with an example. Now, this picture shows the different stages of human life. So, when you were born, your body was small, you were not able to speak and walk, but as you grow older, you start walking, you learn how to speak, your weight and height increased. Now, whatever the structural changes that happened in your body, for example, an increase in weight and height, they are called growth. On the other hand, whatever the functional changes that happen, like you learn how to speak and walk, these are called development. Another point to note is growth ceases after a definite time, like your height can't keep increasing with your age. But development is a lifelong process. You keep learning and become better and better. That's why we humans have so much value for experience and expertise. Anyways, let's move to the next characteristics. So, the second one is maintenance. What do we mean by maintenance is that the organism should be able to maintain itself, it should be able to survive on its own. For this purpose, it requires internal as well as external stability. Internal stability is achieved by life processes. Life processes are all those processes that are required for the survival of an organism. There are different types of life processes, one of which is metabolism. Metabolism is a process by which an organism converts food into energy, which is then utilized for performing other functions. Another important life process is control and coordination. By this process, the organism control and coordinate all different processes. For example, in humans, the brain does the job of control and coordination. So this was all about internal stability. Is this sufficient for survival or maintenance of organism? Well, it will be if we consider ideal situations. Like there is no foreign organism to attack the given organism, but this is not the case. Therefore, we require external stability as well. So here comes the defense mechanism called as the immune system. Immune system provides us with external as well as internal stability. We will discuss the immune system in detail in upcoming videos. So this was all about maintenance. Now this brings us to the next characteristic, adaptation. Adaptation is a process by which an organism becomes more compatible with its environment. We call it biological fitness. Let me explain this with examples. The camel has many adaptive traits for their life in the desert. They have wide feet for walking in the sand, they have long eyelashes and thin slit nostrils that they can close to protect them from blowing sand. The fat in their hump will break down to supply their body with the energy it needs. If we talk about lotus, then the leaves of the lotus plant are very wide and disc-shaped. This allows them to float on water and absorb a large amount of sunlight. The stem and leaf surfaces of lotus are coated with wax, which is very difficult to wet. So, these are examples of adaptations which make organisms more biological fit for their environment. Another important characteristic is reproduction. It is a process by which offspring are produced from parent organisms. This ensures the continuity of organisms. All organisms are made up of cells. So what is a cell? Let's discuss it. A cell is the smallest unit of life. It is also called a building block of an organism. Now look at the picture of stone wall. You can see that it is made up of many stones arranged in order. In the same way, an organism is made by arranging different cells. So how does a cell look like? Let's discuss some of the main components of cell. To make you understand easily, I am going to explain with an analogy. Consider a cell to be a factory. The central part of the cell is known as the nucleus. It is like a control room of a factory, which monitors and controls all the operations in the factory. Another component is mitochondrion, which is like a generator. It provides a power supply for all operations. Ribosomes are like manufacturing machines, producing proteins, which can be perceived as products. The cell membrane is like a door to a factory, and receptors are like watchmen, which governs the entry and exit. And the cytoplasm is like the air that held together all the components of the cell. So, in this way, you can understand the different components of cell. Now, let's discuss the classification of cells. Cells can be classified based on the presence or absence of the nucleus as prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells are those cells that do not have a nucleus. Okay, wait, what? They don't have nucleus? Then how they control themselves? I'm going to answer this question in few minutes. Just hold on. So, prokaryotic cells are cells without a nucleus and eukaryotic cells are cells with a nucleus. Clear? Examples of organisms with prokaryotic cells are bacteria and archaea. On the other side, the examples of organisms with eukaryotic cells are animals, plants, fungus, and protists. Now, organisms can be classified as unicellular organisms and multicellular organisms. Unicellular organisms are those organisms that are made up of only one cell. Yes, you heard it right. They are made up of just a single cell. On the other hand, multicellular organisms are made up of many cells. So, if we see, bacteria and archaea are unicellular, while animals and plants are multicellular. What about fungus and protists? They can be unicellular or multicellular. That is, some types of fungus and protists are unicellular, while other types are multicellular. Now coming back to your question, how prokaryotic cells manage without a nucleus? As you can see, all organisms with prokaryotic cells are unicellular. So, there is only one cell to manage, unlike multicellular, where many cells have to be managed. So, this can be done without a dedicated nucleus. Now, let's move to the next concept. Organisms can be classified based on their size as macroorganisms and microorganisms. Macroorganisms are those organisms which can be seen with the naked human eye. Examples of macroorganisms can be insects like bees, flies, bugs, spiders, etc. Plants, animals, humans are also macroorganisms. Microorganisms are those organisms that cannot be seen with the naked human eye and require a microscope to see them. They are also called microbes. Examples of microorganisms are bacteria, archaea, protists, microfungus, microanimal, and plants. One of the microanimal is tardigrade. It is an 8-legged microanimal also called a water bear, which is just 0.5 mm long. The most interesting part is it is among the most resilient animals known, with abilities to survive extreme conditions such as exposure to extreme temperature and pressure, radiation, and starvation. Green algae are plants with size in microscale. Viruses are non-cellular. What do we mean by non-cellular is that they don't have all the components that a cell usually have. Like they don't have ribosomes or mitochondria, therefore they don't have all the characteristics that organism possess. For example, they can grow and adapt, but they don't have a metabolism mechanism, therefore they are dependent on someone else for their survival. Also, due to non-availability of metabolism, they are internally unstable. Therefore, it is a debatable topic that viruses are organisms or not. Some scientists call them non-cellular organisms, while others say they are simply not organisms. They are perceived as between the living and non-living things. But we are not going to discuss this here. Coming back to the original topic, viruses, if you want an analogy for them, then robots can be viewed as good analogy. They don't have their own energy production mechanism, but when energy is supplied to them, they can perform the intended jobs, right? Now let's discuss some more about cells. We humans are multicellular organisms. What we mean by multicellular is not only we have more than one cell, but we have more than one type of cell. And these cells can be classified based on their functions, shapes and size. There are hundreds of types of cells in human body. Let's look at some of the major cell types one by one. So the first one is stem cells. Stem cells are those cells that have not yet decided what type of cells they want to become. Consider them to be a student who just got his primary education and yet to choose which profession he wants to take, right? They act as a repair system in the body when there is a need for particular cells and take that space. The next cell type is bone cells. These perform functions like making new bones, dissolving the damaged bones, and communication. Another important cell type is blood cells. Blood cells can be broadly classified as red blood cells, RBCs, platelets, and white blood cells, that is WBCs. RBCs work as oxygen carriers in our bodies. The main function of platelets is to prevent excessive bleeding by clotting your blood, and WBCs are our immunity system. They are our defense mechanism. What are the different types of WBCs? We will discuss in the immunity related discussion. Okay. Now, the next type of cells is muscle cells. There are different types of muscle cells like skeletal muscle cells, which maintain posture, stabilize bones and joints, and control internal movement. Another type is cardiac muscle cells, which keep your heart pumping through involuntary movement. This is one feature that differentiates it from skeletal muscle, which you can control. Fat cells are those cells that are responsible for storing energy. They are like backup batteries. They are also provide thermal isolation and cushioning for organs. Nerve cells are responsible for sending and receiving signals from the brain. They are like communication system of our body. Other cell types are sperm cells and egg cells. These cells are responsible for the reproduction in humans. Skin cells provide us protection from outer environment and also responsible for sensation. That's all for today. Now let's quickly revise what we discussed today. We started with organism and learned what an organism is. Then we discussed the basic characteristics of organism like growth and development and the difference between them. Then maintenance, in which we talked about life processes and immune system. Then came adaptation, in which we learn what is biological fitness, compatibility with the environment, and also reproduction. Then we learned that all organisms are made from cells, and cell is the smallest unit of life. It is a building block of organisms. Then we discuss the basic parts of cells with the help of a factory analogy. Nucleus, which is like control room, mitochondrion, analogous to generator, ribosome, like a machine, proteins, which are like products, cell membrane, which is like a door, and receptors, which are analogous to watchmen, and lastly cytoplasm, which is like air. Then we move to types of cells. Prokaryotic cells, that is cells without nucleus. Eukaryotic cells, that is cells with nucleus. Then we talked about types of organisms based on number of cells as unicellular and multicellular organisms. Also, we discussed types of organisms based on their size as macroorganisms and microorganisms. We learned that viruses are non-cellular, they are like robots, they are neither living nor non-living. And finally, we talked about major cell types in humans: stem cells, bone cells, blood cells, muscle cells, fat cells, nerve cells, sperm and egg cells, and skin cells. In the upcoming video, we will be talking about fascinating concepts like DNA and RNA and mutations. So, make sure you subscribe the channel and press the bell icon for timely notification. If you enjoyed and learned something from this video, then make sure that you like the video and share it with others so that we all work together and battle this infodemic. That's all for now. We will meet soon in the upcoming video. Till then, stay safe, stay connected.